Had to run away because of floods, landslides. Do we have anyone here who ever could not go back to his or her home because it was destroyed in the disaster? Yeah? Can you tell us about your experience?
It was not the flood, but the earthquake of 2005. I was in that part of the area because I belong to that area, and just as the shaking of the houses started, we went away. We went to the graveyard, and it was then the rain started. And for almost like 15 days, we couldn't go back to our home because there were so many aftershocks. And then the first time in my life, I realized how the life is actually. When you are in the tent, when you are without home, and when your own house seems like the most dangerous place on earth, which is the most safest place for you. So.
Thank you so much. So you were displaced by a disaster. That's what I want to talk about. And the question is, were you an exception or were you one of many, many people who are displaced? Let's look at some situations. Somalia 2010-2011, the peak of 10 years of drought. Within a few months, drought turns into famine. 290,000 people showing up at the borders of Kenya, Ethiopia, Djibouti, asking those governments, please let us in. Because if you have to remain in our country, we will die from famine. We are not really coming from conflict-affected areas, even though there is a conflict in our country. And the question for these countries was, do we accept them as refugees, drought refugees, or are they not covered by what we have of refugees? January 2010, Haiti earthquake. More than 1 million people displaced within their own country. 160,000 people fleeing to the neighboring Dominican Republic. Haitians later going further away. For instance, Brazil has 39,000 Haitians who came in the aftermath of the earthquake. Large numbers. But then there are these situations, the Pacific Island, another storm, another king tide, storm surge, and another village is gone. And the question is, how long will this last? When will the last people have to move away? I asked the question about whether you were an exception or one of many. You were one of many. These are the figures, and that's not the thousands, that's the millions. We have between 13 and 14 million people in the last 6 years who were displaced by disasters. The average is 27.5 million newly displaced per year. 27 million, that's a large, large number, and it's every year. Some of these people remain in displacement for a relatively short period of time, others for months and months, and some even for years before they can go back, before their houses are rebuilt. What does this all have to do with disaster risk reduction? Sorry? Let's take the example of what happened in Vanuatu last weekend. The question is, what could have been done before so that people are not displaced? Some reports say a quarter of the population of Vanuatu, a quarter of the whole population of a country is now in displacement. What could we have done before? Of course, disaster risk reduction, building codes, etc., but it's a poor country. You cannot expect that everyone can live in a very strong building. Nobody expected the magnitude of the cyclone like this, but things could have been done. I was in Vanuatu 2 years ago. I discussed with the director of the Disaster Management Authority, and he said, yes, we had and we will have displaced people. But one problem we have is, where can we host them? Where can we put them? Because the government doesn't own any land on Vanuatu. All the land is owned by the families, by the clans. What we need to do is to identify land where we could temporarily host displaced persons. We then have to negotiate and in that sense find a space. So that's one thing regarding preparedness for displacement. Find evacuation sites, find relocation sites, temporarily at least. And then of course, now that the rebuilding starts, do the rebuilding in a way so that next time not as many people will have to go away, are displaced. Part of this preparedness sometimes is planned relocation. Planned relocation in the sense of looking at where are particularly vulnerable villages, where are the areas where people are at high risk, and then move them with their participation, with their agreement, very well planned processes. We know that relocation that does not involve the communities, that is not owned by the communities, very often are not sustainable, will not work. This is an example from Fiji. Fiji is in the process of relocating a series of villages away from eroded coastlines. So that's very much linked to climate change and sea level rise. But there are also cases of planned relocation out of areas, for instance, at risk of landslides, at risk of whatever natural hazards you can identify. And then, sometimes the best option for people is not to wait till really the disaster strikes and there is nothing left for them than to end up in a tent like you had to do. That's possible not so much when we're talking about earthquakes, sudden onset disasters, but it's possible when we're talking about slow onset disasters. I had a long meeting yesterday with President Tong from Kiribati, and he knows that these people, at least many of them, will have to move away from that very vulnerable island. And what he's promoting is a concept of migration with dignity. What he says is, my people should be able to migrate to other countries, not in irregular ways, but being admitted legally, being allowed to work in another country temporarily, send back remittances, helping the families, but also immigrating permanently, so that our people can start to find a place outside of my own country. But I don't want my people to end up marginalized at the fringes of the big cities. That's why we have to invest into educating, training them, so they can compete on the international labor market. And then they can migrate with dignity and will not end up being more vulnerable. What it means is, human mobility is part of disaster risk reduction. What it means is, disaster risk reduction is not only about allowing people to stay. It is about being realistic. It's about accepting that sometimes people have to move, that they have to evacuate, that they will be displaced, that they sometimes have to relocate permanently in a planned way, and that sometimes they will have to migrate even abroad outside their country. One of the key issues of the negotiations that are still ongoing today is the contested points, whether to integrate displacement and human mobility into the Sendai framework. The good news this morning is that not all, but many of the paragraphs that address displacement and human mobility have been agreed, accepted last night. They were negotiated till 3 in the morning. So I do think, hopefully tomorrow morning we can say, yes, there are good news for people displaced. There are good news for people who will end up in the future in a situation like you did in the earthquake. But then the next step comes, to make that a reality, to integrate human mobility into disaster risk reduction plans and strategies, to do things that are practical, that have an impact for the people on the ground. So the work only will start. I do have a few minutes left, so questions, comments, other experiences.